Hello, everyone. Hey, friend.
Friend.
Tell
How you
everybody
doing?
how when we started this, I had a do-rag on my head and I still have a crop top on. Just it's business up top.
Wait, business up top, party on the bottom. Big age party. Are you wearing sweatpants on the bottom?
Basically, they're silk trousers that are wrinkled. So my version of a sweatpant. When you're me, that's basically
No,
sweatpants.
your sweatpants are cashmere.
I have a pair of those as well. You know me so well. What's tea, sis? What you been up to?
I've just been sick.
Oh, I still hear it in your voice.
I
How'd you
know,
get
but
through?
I'm better. But tell you've been doing fun things, festive.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I am right now shooting Vlogmas, and Vlogmas has been a lot of fun. So, 3 videos up on YouTube for your pleasure outside of the weekly drops here on Justice. So, if y'all ain't tapped into this content, girl, you are missing out. So that's been getting me out the house because usually I would hibernate this time of year. But I
I
made a commitment to do things.
I full on hibernated and I've created my own verb.
Okay, what is it?
Wintering. To winter.
To winter.
It's like to hibernate, but I'm wintering.
It's like when you summer on the vineyard.
Yeah. But I winter in my bed
Oh, nice, nice.
or
Your
in my
whoop loves that.
pajamas or in my house.
Okay. Okay. Good luck with that. And you all let us know how you're wintering, how your winter is going. But we got a lot to talk about today, friend. What are we chatting about?
So we're talking about the Luigi case. The Luigi that took the world by storm.
Talk about it.
We're going to talk about the killing of the young man on the New York City subway
Yeah.
and the fallout and what has happened, how that has been politicized. And then the Southern Poverty Law Center's annual report.
Yeah. And that is going to be the first part of today's discussion. And then for our second half, we have a great guest, right?
Yeah. So an expert on sexual violence, particularly an expert on SA, particularly on college campuses. But we want to talk to her specifically about kind of the impact of the Trump administration and the elevation of different individuals who have been implicated in pretty serious SA incidents. And what
It's a
does
frat
that
house.
mean?
What does that mean for us? And so it's feels like a frat house over there. And so we're looking forward to talking to her about that for sure. Just for a reminder for folks who might be new here, welcome. But we always abbreviate certain terms for the YouTube algorithm. So that's why Margot said SA. But let's jump into Luigi. Margot, okay, let's hold up. Do you remember we were together when we realized that happened?
Yep.
Do you remember that? So we were on Zoom checking in about life and big age. You do this on Zoom. And I was showing you wintering. I was showing you a news platform that I just subscribed for called Ground News. And you said, wait, scroll back up. What does that say? You said CEO shot in the head. You were like, Tashira, that's insane. And I was like,
You're like, I don't know, 40% on the left, 60% on the right.
I'm concerned about the bias.
Okay, is this real? Because we were checking in at like a 9 a.m. meeting on a Monday, last Monday, or whenever it happened.
Yep, we certainly were. It was the Monday before last, I think. And 2 things I think really are wild. Number one, obviously, that it happened, which we will get into, but also the fact that my reaction was more gun violence in America. It did not even stand out to me. And so, interestingly enough, we won't have time to get into this today, but did you read the Atlantic piece where it talks about how extremism has become mainstream?
Yeah.
And so that was a moment that I had to self-reflect about what have I been digesting. I mean, we know so much state-sanctioned violence, especially, that has desensitized me. But you have some thoughts about Luigi. Let us know.
Well, I mean, I think there's so many things to deconstruct about Luigi. But the one thing that has been normalized for me, I actually was not. I was sensitized to this as soon as I saw it. So it wasn't the incident, but the thing that has been desensitized, I think, writ large, is this issue of vigilantism. Is that the right word?
I think
Right,
so.
where folks taking over the role of the state or the role of system change in their own hands, and how we've normalized that, maybe as a reaction or not, but as a reaction to maybe when things don't get done, and how we've normalized that as behavior that's maybe acceptable. And that part is concerning. I saw something last night that it was like the only thing about Luigi that I could agree with. I don't think the celebration of him is appropriate, even though I have major qualms with the American healthcare system. But I believe it was Chris Rock was like, "Yeah, it's sad that the CEO died, but drug dealers get shot."
This is the power of the comedian. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, there's nothing that actually has resonated so much with me. Like, we can have a lot of empathy for him. And
I mean, this is the nuance that we always talk about. Right. And this is what I think there are certain forces that want us to remove this and for us to have a very myopic, like one.
I don't think it's one thing.
And it's not one thing. Nothing is. But in this case, I actually saw in Humans of New York, a social worker was profiled, and she was like, I'm a social worker, and I empathize with why someone would want to take this step. While I don't agree with it, it is also very difficult for me to feel sorry for the person who lost his life. And I completely understand that.
So I do feel very sorry for the person who has lost his life, but I also can empathize. I also think the response to Luigi is so different than if he had been Black.
So someone had said that in the comments. This is where we're probably going to disagree, because I don't feel sorry for him. I think that it's horrible.
You don't feel sorry for the guy that died?
No.
Oh.
I think it's horrible that it happened. I think that I do not condone violence on this podcast or anywhere else. Do I feel sorry? Maybe for his family, of course. For his children, absolutely. But I think we need to examine the types of crimes that are committed in this society every day that are not considered to be criminal, and to become so successful, like one of the highest paid CEOs of that healthcare company of all time, comes with a denial of coverage. There are not two ways about it. And I think we too often condone the corporatocracy, and we like herald these CEOs, and they don't deserve it.
But do they deserve to die?
I don't think they deserve to die, but I'm agnostic about his death. Yeah, but I'm agnostic about his death. It's what I
fine. I'm agnostic about his death too. Like this is like a capitalistic apocalyptic shit show. Absolutely. That we have allowed insurance companies to dictate who gets medical care and when.
Absolutely. I'm gonna lift up two people in the comments. Christine says, Luigi, is it pronounced Mangione?
I think so. It's Italian, yeah.
A clear demonstration of toxic integration of pretty, financial, and white male privilege. What you just said, Fran. You literally just said if he was a Black man, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And then Afteen22 said, I'm not mad, I'm not glad, I'm not sad. I just understand insurance companies commit murder every day. Yeah. I had... Okay. Go ahead.
No, you go.
I woke up on... this had been like festering all last week after I traveled. And I hadn't told you this, but like, remember when my thumbs used to hurt really bad? Now both of my arms hurt really bad. And I woke up and I just couldn't turn my neck. And I sat on the couch, and now in hindsight, it was very dramatic, burst into tears. And I was crying, friend, not actually from the pain, but I was crying because I was like, I don't know what to do. I told my partner, I said, call my mama, call my grandmama, call somebody. Because the way my insurance works, I can't walk into who I know I need to see today. And x-ray isn't going to help me. No one at primary care or urgent care is going to help
No, but
me.
acupuncture would, or massage.
Here we go. And physical therapy would. And I can't walk into a physical therapist and just say, knock, knock, I'm having nerve pain.
So that gets me to another point. So there's two other things that I think I hope will be elevated in this conversation. And not, I mean, in our conversation, I know they will, but like in the conversation writ large. And that's the role of chronic pain on people's well-being.
Amen.
And how there are modalities of healing that our healthcare system doesn't acknowledge work. And this is someone who, I mean, we don't know, but like appears from everything that we've seen to have gone really drastic based on chronic pain.
Based on chronic pain. Yeah. Do you think that insurance companies would do anything different? I mean, we know his job was posted the next day, but will the system itself?
No, well, no, because I don't think the system, this is why I don't believe in vigilante stuff, because I feel like if the system responds now, it's going to appear, this is like the American, like it's going to appear like this murder influenced how insurance companies see and cover people. And I don't think they would be willing to respond that way.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also agree with that, Em, because, you know, I am an organizer at heart. And so when you talk about vigilantism and someone that's not connected to movement, there are people who've been organizing around these issues around universal health care, around systems changes as it relates to America's healthcare system for decades.
Exactly.
And this type of thing stands to usurp their hard work. And so it is not based in movement principles at all. So we can agree on that for sure. Yeah. And that's what Michelle said.
Do you think they're going to change?
Girl, no. I think I agree with Michelle. Michelle says if Luigi's name, no, I'm sorry. The second Michelle. Yep. Luigi could have been more strategic with his activism. It didn't have to murder. Maybe cyber. Please don't tell anybody I said that. Sorry that we put it on screen, girl. I hadn't read the whole thing. Okay, but strategic with activism, yes. Because we know from the things that he said and he's shouting, and I guess the manifesto, he hoped to have some kind of political gain with this. So, and thank you, Marquise, for joining. Marquise says, and I think he is also privileged from aesthetics and status. So I'm interested in how he will be perceived in court and how the public response will play into this. Make class consciousness sexy. That's interesting, girl.
So the other element of this that's just, you know, it is what it is, but I think, again, kind of just like a lot of public health issues impact everyone, it's just who gets access to what type of care in response to those issues, right? He grew up, as from what we know, very, very privileged. In Baltimore, he went to one of the fanciest all boys day schools in Baltimore. 2 degrees from Penn,
wow,
undergraduate and graduate, and you know was like a adorer of Elon Musk.
Really am.
And so allegedly, you know, in some of the stuff that he had posted to Reddit, I believe, and around his surgery and chronic pain and injury, part of it, and there's a lot to unpack here, but and I'm not making light of it. Like chronic pain is such a serious issue. Back pain, neck pain, any type of nerve pain is debilitating, and directly, if not immediately, impacts your mental health and well-being. And so I'm not minimizing that, but one of the biggest allegedly things was that he couldn't be intimate.
Do you so you mentioned
because of the pain.
Because of the pain. Yeah, of course, of course. Outside of the pain, well, it sounds like you're saying that those two things are connected. The pain and his mental health are clearly connected.
Well, there's also like some, I mean, young men in their 20s are at risk for having mental health crises as well.
Okay. And that's what I was wondering as well. All right.
So I think we don't know
what came first and also how one played upon the other. But we will keep track of this. I'm sure we all will. It has dominated the news cycle. One of the first social media posts that I saw about it, friend, I took a first class flight to the comments because, like many of us, there are conflicting feelings. And so I'm like, I wonder how people are responding. This was on an NPR post. And when I tell you, I got past maybe 3 scrolls, so dozen of comments, and everyone was riding for Luigi. And one person said, and it wasn't like in a performative way, like it wasn't like in a girly TikTok-y way. It was like, I can understand, I can empathize. And one person said, I'm sorry, but my empathy for the CEO is out of network. So I don't have it to give to that person. So there's something right now that's happening to the American consciousness that I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. I don't know if it's going to create more of a call for change, but we are at the precipice of something very, very different.
We are. And the timing is ironic. I don't know, like with all the stuff happening around Trump and all of that. But then also right before this, there was an article that I had read about, it was not United Healthcare, but another big national healthcare plan denying coverage for anesthesia over a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm. They pulled that back the next day, but yes.
Oh, well, okay, fine. But that came out. And then here in Massachusetts and beyond, I don't know if you've heard about the Steward healthcare crisis, which is Steward was a network of hospitals here in Massachusetts, and I think maybe nationally, that were funded by private equity. And so they were private hospitals, and the CEO was making like tens of millions of dollars and did not, like, there was lack of basic care. So people were dying in the emergency rooms, like dying of sepsis. I mean, like really preventable death. A young person in Brockton, Massachusetts died of a heart attack at 36 in the emergency room.
What?
Yeah, like they had been like, I'm having a heart attack. And the nurse was like, sit down. And then she went and sat down and then died.
For just complete negligence.
And now the CEO has been subpoenaed by Congress and is rejected the subpoena. It's all really bad. It's very, very, very bad. But again, this thing about private industry dictating how we stay healthy.
Here we go. That's what I say, because I don't know if I want to go to a hospital that's run by a private equity firm. That is insane. The bottom line is the only thing that matters. There's no other. They only open their doors to make a profit.
And then the country votes against universal health care. I don't understand.
Over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
So that's the confusing part too, right? People riding for Luigi, but also voting against universal health care.
Well, that's why I mean this performative, like TikTokery of it all, that I don't find helpful. I think that there's a lack of political education about how this all works and actually what could have solved it. I think that's where we are, right? We are missing the pieces to the puzzle that create a policy and systemic solution to this. So,
oh, look at Boston girls on this. Let's highlight this. Boston. There's not frequently Boston people on. So. Crazy.
It's madness. Okay, more in the news, friend. We'll keep, track of the Luigi thing. You all stay tuned for more. But friend, J.D. Vance, you're soon to be vice president. That man just is racist, It's like, I wonder if he wakes up in the morning and like takes off his KKK hood, because that's what he sleeps in, and like puts it on the nightstand.
Sorry, I was going to say something unkind, but I'm just.
There's something that's more unkind than being compared to a Klans person.
Well, it was about his wife.
Okay. All right. We're going to leave Usha out of it.
Not fair to her. Is she in bed with him or not? I don't know. While he's wearing his hood.
While he's wearing his Klan hood. Okay, so we know that a very big judgment came down last week as it relates to the killer of Jordan Neely on a New York subway system. Now, there have been many, many acts of violence against Black bodies. And so, if, like me, you may have forgotten this incident, Jordan Neely was likely unwell, suffering a mental health crisis, right? And he was yelling. He was a Michael Jackson performer, and he was yelling out on the platform when this white man put him in a chokehold that lasted for minutes. It went on and on. 6 entire minutes. And this is not law enforcement. Or was he
360 seconds.
Did he have a connection to, he was an ex-Marine. That's what it was.
He was trained in killing people.
And he killed Jordan. And he was acquitted last week. So that's number one. We knew that was a likely result. But what else happened, friend?
So he was acquitted. And as expected, like there's groups of people that fell on either side of people very happy that he was acquitted, people very, very upset that he was acquitted. J.D. Vance immediately invites this man to sit with him, Trump, and Elon Musk at the Army-Navy game.
Yep. Immediately.
And celebrating him as an American hero.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know this, Em, but I must have missed the ways in which the right had been doing that all along, to the point where Ron DeSantis either contributed to, or I think
he posted a GoFundMe for his
GoFundMe. Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, the good old boys have been saying he's one of us. And we are using him, I think, as this moniker that we are done with the wokeism. We are done with Black Lives Matter, because in fact they don't, and they never did, and we need to stop pretending. And the soon-to-be vice president is telling you that openly. What do you think? And why him? That's what I think people need to kind of dig into, interrogate. Why? What is it that this person represents, you think?
Well, I think veterans in society hold a different level of respect as they serve the country selflessly, allegedly. I think this one is interesting. I had 2 long conversations about this case over the weekend, and like everything, and it doesn't fit in a soundbite, this is a nuanced case.
Okay.
So if anyone's, I think, well, I don't think the case is nuanced. I think the facts are nuanced. Okay. And so I think they're glomming on to the fact that there were people on that subway who were scared.
Thank you for this. Okay. Add it to the chat. It's necessary.
And I have had that experience.
We just had it together in New York. Remember, we had to cross the street.
So we had it together, and I had it the time before when I was in New York with my kids on the subway. And did I feel some level of fear? Yeah. But then the response.
It's not death.
It's right. And so I think that's where we can hold both and say
a 6-minute chokehold because other people.
You didn't need to kill him.
You did not need to kill him.
You could have called an ambulance.
The authorities.
Or like the metro, or get off the subway car and get onto another subway car, or give him $5. Like, and so that's where I'm really worried.
And I mean, going back to some of the other comments, Marquise and others, this idea that who gets to take justice into their own hands and be celebrated for it. I mean, it's different sides, but it's the same coin. Luigi and this guy.
Right. This is the public vigilante shit.
Yeah, one for a progressive cause and one being celebrated by the right, quite honestly. And I think it's kind of like with the killing of in Sanford, Florida, one of the first cases, the one that started BLM, friend.
Oh.
The little boy with the Arizona iced tea and the Skittles. Not Mike Brown. It's been so many, y'all. Y'all know who I'm talking about. God forgive me. But it's this idea that we're not supposed to recognize that it's all out racism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an all out attack on Black bodies.
Tamir Rice, yes.
Thank you. Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin is what I'm talking about. Thank you. All out attack on Black bodies, anti-Black racism, and it's being codified and institutionalized in the same ways that it has been since our enslavement. And I think essentially welcoming this person into the White House demonstrates that. Thank you, guys. Yep, Trayvon is who I was trying to say. Thank you, everyone. But we don't have a lot more time. Speaking about
can I just add to that? Because not only welcoming him into the White House, into the inner circle, I'm sure he's going to get some like fancy position, like at the Pentagon or something. But the message that sends, and who's going to feel safe, and who's welcome and who's not.
So when your Black friends tell you that they don't feel safe, this is why, right? When women tell you they don't feel safe, we'll discuss this with our next guest or with our guest. This is why. Because when the most powerful forces in your society give certain people a green light, they take that message and they hold on to it. I can put someone in a chokehold as a private citizen for 6 minutes, be acquitted on a Monday, and by Saturday, I'm sitting beside the vice president. Know what it is. Speaking of other forms of racism, really quickly, because I just want to drop this in for people to go and take a look at it. The Southern Poverty Law Center is releasing its Year in Hate report very soon. I'm sure it's already been written, not on the website yet, but they're starting to ramp up social media around it. And what I found really interesting was their coverage of the religious right. And specifically Christian extremists, and how this group called the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, is running it right now. They are running it, and they are a Christian extremist group that has so much power and influence in the government, right, Em?
Yeah, and I think the thing that, and we'll talk about this again, that is just so deeply disturbing is that you and I had never heard of them. As people who read the newspaper every single day. And so again, what is going on where there are these realities in this country of groups that are moving things, and all of us are sitting unaware?
So a couple things that I just want to say very quickly. They believe in the 7 mountains mandate. And that is that Christianity needs to penetrate arts, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. Okay. So tell me if you've ever heard of this, because these are some of the causes that they were behind. They believe in banning abortions. Check. Anti-LGBTQ. Well, we seen that policy currently before the Supreme Court.
Modified.
School board takeovers.
Oh,
They're definitely achieving that. Book bans. Same. So they are definitely infiltrating. Their goals are being met. Please take a look at the report, and hopefully by the time it is officially released, we can do a episode on it, friend.
Great. Well, with no further ado, we'd like to introduce our guest today, Nicole, because we don't have a ton of time. Oh, we can't hear you.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, 100% better, Nicole. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
So what should we call you? I know you're a doctor, so I want to be respectful.
You are totally fine to call me Nicole, Dr. Badera, whatever makes you happier.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We just finished talking about some pretty disturbing news items that I'm sure you're also on top of. But we had you on today to help us and our audience kind of better understand the impact of SADV with this new administration. And I'm just wondering if you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we can dive into some questions.
Yeah. So I'm a sociologist. I have my PhD in sociology, and I specifically study the way our social structures make sexual violence more likely to occur. A lot of people think about sexual violence as something that happens just between the victim and perpetrator who are in a room together, but it's so much bigger than that. I study all the rest of it, especially the way our social structures make things worse for survivors when they try to come forward about what they've experienced. We would want things to get better and easier. The opposite tends to be true. They tend to get harder instead. So that's what I study. And I also these days am doing some consulting, working with organizations that want to be part of a solution instead of part of the problem. That's me.
So thank you. I'll kick it off. I'm wondering, when you say organizations that want to be part of the solution, what does that mean? And how are they implementing strategies or changes to make their organizational structure more survivor-centered?
Well, a lot of organizations, sort of the default in the US in particular, but kind of all over the world too, is that our organizations aren't trying to end sexual violence or sexual harassment. They're trying to make it more palatable. They're trying to make us feel better about it when it occurs. So one of your go-to examples would be the sexual harassment trainings we've all done in those workplaces that are horrible. They are frustrating. No matter how much you care about sexual harassment, you never walk out of one of those trainings feeling great. Well, researchers find that those trainings actually make sexual harassment more likely to occur in the workplace. They're not just not helpful or ineffective. They teach perpetrators right where the line is, and they give them the tools and the language to stay just outside of that line of when the organization will do something. And if you've ever been a part of these trainings, you know, they lead to a lot of mockery of sexual harassment as well, that they're very silly. And a lot of that mockery of the training turns into mockery of victims, and it turns into sexual harassment really quickly. So when we talk about what the problem looks like, that's what it looks like, is organizations that are focused on just making us feel better about violence as opposed to doing something about violence. Being part of a solution is pretty simple. It's creating spaces that are intolerant of violence and where violence is not permissible, and where it's a place where it would be considered, for example, to be a sign you're unqualified for your position. So if you treat the people who work under you badly, if you are making sexual advances, if you are abusing them or exploiting them in some way, we would say, I don't think you're qualified to be in your position anymore. That's a really big part of your job.
So tell us a little bit, Nicole, about frat culture and how it relates to the administration. We had a question here about how you actually define it, and why is it important to consider this dynamic within the current political administration or the one that's upcoming?
There are so many good ways to answer this question. I love this question. Part of it, I want to acknowledge from the outset, is that we're not talking about necessarily a frat culture that's separate from fraternities. Fraternities are one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the United States.
Really?
There are some specific fraternities that are much more likely than any other group in society to have people placed on the Supreme Court, to be in Congress. A lot of people have these deep roots. They're part of the same groups of the same fraternities. So sometimes we're literally talking about just they were all in the same fraternity. They're all in the same frat. That's how they know each other. That's part of how their connections are made on campus. Party culture on college campuses has big ramifications after people graduate, especially at elite schools. It's how all these people met. It's how the old boys club was put together. And fraternities, for anybody who doesn't know the history, they really came up on our college campuses when they integrated on race and gender. White men wanted to have parts of campus that were all their own, where they would do their real networking, their real connections, and they didn't want to make anybody else a part of that. And universities allowed them to create fraternities to do that. So sometimes we're literally just talking about fraternities that are powerful. But I think you're also getting at this sort of frat culture, old boys club mentality, where even if they're not a part of the same fraternity, even if they don't literally know each other from college or from a national chapters event that they threw for powerful members of the frat, they're all engaging in this type of behavior to curry favor with each other and to impress each other. Researchers find that the primary reason that men perpetrate sexual harassment is to impress other men and to bond with other men. And we can see that, I see your face, Margo. We can see that in the way that a lot of the violence that's perpetrated is done pretty publicly. So Brett Kavanaugh is a really good example of all of the sexual assault allegations about him that have come to light over the past few years since his confirmation hearing. One of the defining features is there was usually another man present, and he was doing this to entertain another man. They were laughing back and forth. If we think about Christine Blasey Ford's story, it was a gang situation. And so much of that is about connecting with each other. A lot of sexual harassment that takes place in the workplace doesn't take place in front of the victim. It takes place behind her back as a way for two men who are trying to have a conversation with each other, to try to bond with each other, to work on promotions or deals or whatever else they might be doing, to have what they would consider to be, for them, a safe topic. That if they're putting down someone else, that means the two of them are in this club together where they are dominant, they are in control. And that culture really saturates our politics as well, where you would hope that someone who mistreats women would be seen, again, like I said before, as unqualified for their position, that we would see them as someone who should not be a member of Congress, should not be on the Supreme Court. And if instead that's how they're seeking favor with each other, one of the big concerns about that is that violence becomes normalized. They see it as not such a big deal. And they see the subjects of the violence as more, they see them as objects, not as people. They see us, they see women as people for them to involve in their power plays with each other, and not to care about, not to create policy about, not to center in how they do their work.
This is mind blowing. This is because just through these few definitions, Nicole, there are so many ways and places that all of this is applicable within and outside of work, of course. And the word that just immediately came up for me was femophobia, and just this deep hatred of femininity. And this, bros over hoes culture, which I find to be like low-key also homoerotic, because I don't understand why you're working so hard to impress your friends. But that's just me.
Yeah, I'm also just kind of sticking with this one of the things you said, Nicole, around most sexual harassment happens outside of the ears and the eyes of the victim, and how it's done as a social power play, which gets to, of course, like I have studied IPV extensively through my career and as a lawyer, and represented a lot of survivors, and this idea of power and control being kind of at the core of everything, and this idea of asserting your power also socially through harming or like seeking favor with other men by throwing women and their bodies, or people who identify as women or have feminine qualities, under, making them feel unsafe.
Yeah. It's Yeah, it's everything you're saying, where the violence isn't so much the point. And I think this is one of the things that I wish more people knew about sexual violence is people think it's about the victim or the victim's behavior. They think it's something the victim has inspired, or even that it's about controlling. Sometimes it is about controlling an individual victim. But in our workplaces and in our political atmospheres, the victims are more just objects. It's really not about them at all. It's about these interactions between these two men that are bonding over these acts of violence. You know, the Access Hollywood tape that came out during the 2016 election comes to mind immediately, where there is all of this violent rhetoric taking place literally behind closed doors because the goal is just for these two men to bond with each other. And this felt like something they could talk about.
So the other thing that stands out to me, and I was thinking about the Access Hollywood tape, obviously, as well, but kind of with some of the purported appointees under this new administration who have, without kind of a doubt, like perpetrated some forms of violence, right? Like they've settled cases, there's eyewitness recounts of it. And this idea of not only a double, like different expectations, but how if these individuals were in different bodies, if they were in brown bodies or black bodies or female bodies, and they were showing up drunk and harassing people at Christmas parties, they would be terminated immediately or arrested. But now they're being elevated. And how do we kind of understand that for what it is?
This is one of the big findings from my research. So I have a book that just came out this year called On the Wrong Side: How Universities Protect Perpetrators and Betray Survivors of Sexual Violence. And one of the things I did differently in the research for that book than a lot of other researchers is I spent a year on campus for myself, and I interviewed the victims, the perpetrators, and the school administrators involved in their cases. And so that meant one of the questions that I could answer that a lot of other people can't answer is what happens to these men after they're accused. We've had all these conversations about college campuses in particular, Title IX, and there's been this idea that the men who are accused, their lives are getting ruined, they're getting derailed, they had these promising futures, and then what happens? Well, since I conducted this project, I did this work at the very beginning, or I guess the middle of the last Trump administration, but before a lot of his policies had gone into effect in this kind of gray area of legality, where these institutions were kind of between the Obama administration and the Trump administration. And so that's just a little window setting in terms of what time we're talking about. But one of the things that we didn't know at the time was, how do these cases actually turn out? And now there's this national research, and we know that a perpetrator is expelled through a report to the Title IX office less than 1% of the time on your average college campus. It's incredibly rare. And one of the questions I had is, okay, so if they're still on campus, do people think differently about them? What happens? And what I found is not just that they are unaffected, which I think is what a lot of feminists have said in the past, is that these men are fine, but I actually found that they were elevated and they had higher social status than before, which is exactly what we're talking about in these appointees. I think there's been a whole conversation about how these appointees are, people are overlooking the violence, or that they don't care about the violence. And I would say from my research, I would actually take it a step farther and say that these are seen as qualifications for the position. That especially in an administration that is openly misogynistic, that wants to take away women's rights very openly. You know, this isn't something that we have to say for them. We can look at their own words and see that that's true. We can look at Trump's track record and see that that's true. If the thing that they're looking for in these candidates is someone who will continue that project, who won't have a moment of morality where they look at their wife or their daughter and say, I'm having second thoughts about what I'm here to do, that's going to be considered to be a good person for the job from the Trump administration standpoint. When they do want, you know, one of the results of a lot of abortion bans is more women will die, more children will die. And that's something that they need people to be okay with. And so it's not really surprising that someone with a sexual violence or intimate partner violence history would be kind of the person that they might think makes sense. I'll also say that one of the things I see in this appointees is this kind of mob mentality of the old boys network, which I think Matt Gaetz is a really good example of this, where he has this well-known history of sexual abuse of various kinds. And that can be used because sexual violence is considered to be morally wrong. We don't always act like it is, but we can act either way. And so in politics, we'll often see that when a political figure has not stayed in line with what someone in a position of power has wanted to do, then those sexual violence allegations that were considered to be acceptable or even okay or a good thing in the past can be flipped, and they can be used as the reason that they're removed, when often the real reason they were removed had nothing to do with that. And so we do see sexual violence used as a political football, really by a lot of men in politics. Republicans do it the most openly, but Democrats certainly do it sometimes too, where you kind of have this moment of like, wait, you were fine with this for years. This person kept being elevated and elevated and elevated, and now it's become this big problem. And the reason I call it a mob mentality is that's kind of how the mob works too, right? Everybody has stuff on each other, so that if you are disloyal, all of a sudden those secrets that they knew about you can become public as justification for removing you from the power hierarchy. It's the same thing in politics.
This is blowing my mind. I wish the research actually wasn't telling us something that is so obvious in this moment. It's like, yes, of course, they're actually seeking these people. You know, it's not as if it's a coincidence of these people's qualifications that they have this in common. No, these are the kind of people that, to uphold patriarchal, white supremacist, cis heterosexual normative values to this degree, it takes someone who has a close relationship with sexual violence. That is what it takes to shepherd in this world order. So does this mean that the Me Too movement is dead? Does it mean that
No. No, I don't think so. And I think for women's participation in politics, we have very often done that outside of the formal channels of political power. It's not unusual for, we haven't seen a lot of legislation around sexual violence come out of Congress. We really have a couple of acts. That's about it. Pretty much everything else that women are doing to organize politically, which we have gained a lot, we do in opposition to the patriarchs who are in power. And so, no, I don't think the Me Too movement is dead at all. I think Me Too in large part came in resistance to the Trump administration, to things that were becoming normalized by the Trump administration, and seeing this violent rhetoric that used to be, for maybe younger listeners, younger viewers, they might not remember what it was like before Trump, because that was a while ago now. And if there's anything I've learned as a university professor, it's that when you have a bunch of 18-year-olds in a room, even if something happened 2 years ago, they might have been sheltered from that information. They might have been shielded from stuff that the rest of us take for granted. But before the Trump administration, this kind of stuff was still happening, but in a way that was a lot more, for lack of a better word, politically correct. They wouldn't call it sexual violence as openly. They would find some way to blame the victim or to make it sound like it was an affair or something else, some other kind of deviance that was more socially acceptable and less connected to morality and violence. And the Trump administration really brought this violence to the forefront. They were a lot more overt about it. And that's a big part of where Me Too's virality came from, because we know Me Too had existed for a long time before the hashtag went viral. And so, no, I don't think Me Too is dead. In some ways, I think that there can be a lot of shared understanding in these moments when we're not questioning ourselves all the time, when it's a little bit more overt. I will say, though, that it's a double-edged sword, because when it's overt for long enough, that starts to feel normal. That little disclaimer I just did for young people who might not have remembered what it was like before Trump took power the first time, I have to do that because it's become normal, because it doesn't feel violent in the way that it does to someone from my generation that didn't grow up with it being quite the way it is right now. And so it's our moment to make the most of. And the most important thing that we can do is try to remember that this isn't normal, to try to remember that this type of violence is not the society we want to live in, even if historically it's what we've had in this country, but that we are looking for something better.
Do you think, and I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about this, but Tushar and I have gone back and forth about, is there value? And I don't know if we have a conclusion, but is there value that the cat's out of the bag, that it's not, a meritocracy. We don't actually live in a democracy. Like, working hard is not going to get you where you want to go necessarily unless you know certain people or of a certain class, gender, race, social status. Is there value in it being so overt? I 100% agree that this is not the world we want to live in. It's not the world we want to leave for the next generation. It's not the world that I want in any part of, actually. But I wonder, for someone like you who's an expert on this, is it good for the cause that it's just out there now in this way?
You know, I don't think so. And the way I talk about this a lot of the time is through, I just made this up. This is not like somebody else's fancy academic concept, but I call it the Weinstein effect, where after all of the press coverage of Harvey Weinstein, it felt like the bar was a lot higher for people to think that a perpetrator had done something wrong. And that now the bar was that it had to be a serial perpetrator there wasn't just a gender imbalance, but they needed to be in a position of power in your workplace. And one of the things that, in a lot of the rhetoric around Me Too, which is so different than the Me Too movement, is so different than the Me Too organization, but the way it was talked about in the press was through this lens of perpetrators and bad actors. And there was this kind of race to find the worst one. And a lot of people who were engaging in incredibly violent, damaging actions were just sort of swept under the rug as, well, that's not shocking anymore. That's not going to get clicks anymore. And so that's the main thing I worry about, is that when it is so overt, instead of that, there is an opportunity where that would open us up to be able to understand this type of violence better, for us to be able to say, wow, and this is where it comes from. And you can see it not just, you would hope in a story like this, you wouldn't just look at the most, overtly violent, horrible thing somebody said or did and say that's the problem, but to actually say, well, what's everything else they did that included that same kind of thinking that allowed them to hide in plain sight? Let's unpack the whole toolkit. But we do have this tendency to instead rush to say anything except that bad thing is not bad enough. And I was kind of stunned. I saw this in my field work as well, that there's this idea that the reason we get these sexual assault cases wrong is because it's a he said, she said, there's not enough evidence, it's unclear what happened. In almost every story I tell in the book, if a perpetrator was involved, which they very rarely are, most of the time our organizations make violence claims go away before the perpetrator even knows they were accused. But in the cases where they were involved, the perpetrator's narratives aligned almost perfectly with the victims in pretty much every case. A lot of the time, they even confessed to the violence. They weren't hiding it. And instead, it was people within the institution, people who are powerful and want to keep this perpetrator there. They were the ones looking for ambiguity, or what another researcher named Jackie Cruz, who is also my business partner, she's so very smart. But one of the things that her concepts that she came up with, this idea of orchestrating complexity. And so when the violence is really clear, really obvious, but it doesn't align with what we want to do, people will come up with these complexities in very simple, straightforward cases to try to justify maintaining the status quo, looking the other way. And we see it in our personal lives when, let's say that the perpetrator is someone in your family and you want to invite them to a wedding because you want to invite the whole family. And you think a lot of the time the language that gets brought up are co-optations of our own values, things like inclusivity. I want to be inclusive. I want to invite the whole family to my wedding. And so people will look for these justifications to ignore the violence. In our organizations, it's things like blaming victims, looking for inconsistencies or creating inconsistencies that make total sense if you're an expert. But from the perspective of the institution, they can use that to say, well, our hands are tied, we couldn't have done anything, or we can't be sure. If we think about the Kavanaugh case, there was a lot of, we believe Christine Blasey Ford, but there isn't enough evidence for a legal standard, was a lot of the language used, as if those two things are separate, as if when we have enough information to believe somebody, it's not enough.
With her in particular, too, there was a lot of like, oh, well, boys will be boys. And like, this might have happened when he was in high school, but he shouldn't be it shouldn't damage his career. Whereas her whole life has been derailed.
Right. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I worry about when it's so overt, is that then the bar becomes time. We can say, oh, well, it's been a couple of years now, so isn't that long enough that we should have let it go, or whatever other kind of complexity will be created.
I knew we were, the language was being co-opted of the larger movement when I heard someone at work one time say, so-and-so got me too'd, talking about a man. So he got me too'd. And to your point, Nicole, what he was doing subconsciously or maybe consciously was centering the perpetrator and not the harmed person. It's not so-and-so was convicted of R word. It's not so-and-so committed the act of SA. It was they got me too, meaning they got told on and they got ran through this like legal and public ringer that seemed to have been a lot more prominent at that time. And so thank you for bringing up the fact that the movement is not dead. Obviously, the movement as we know it by the organization and Tarana Burke's work is not over. But I do think that there is something right now, to Margot's point, that has changed about how we're having this discourse online. So can you talk a bit about that?
Well, you gave the perfect interlude, which is that so much of our work has been co-opted. If we go back to Tarana Burke's original organization, she has been so clear. The Me Too movement is not about perpetrators. It is about survivors. And so every time that we're talking about Me Too now in online spaces, there's always somebody who wants to recenter the entire conversation about perpetrators, which the first group that did that was really the press. The press made these stories about, to be able to believe women, what they required were many women coming forward about the same perpetrator. So then the common denominator in the story is this perpetrator. And it makes it seem like if it only happened to one person, it's not important. It's not worthy of coverage. We can't trust what happened, which in our individual lives, we never get to see all of the victims at once. We always see them one at a time. And so that way of handling things, it's kind of predictable to me that it would derail the way it did, where there was so much focus on perpetrators and so much creation of ambiguity around the individual victim and the idea that the individual victim is never enough to be equal to the individual perpetrator. And so in our online spaces, we're up against a lot now, because not only have we had this co-optation of very hard-earned topics, and this is a big part of how the conservative agenda works. They literally use our concepts and our words, and then they apply them to something else. So that then I think restorative justice is a really good example of this right now. So restorative justice has an incredibly long history, especially in Indigenous communities. And now a lot of organizations are doing restorative justice. I'll put this in big quotes, what they call restorative justice that is not restorative justice. What they're talking about is mediation, which is very unpopular with survivors and survivor advocates because mediation is known to more deeply entrench the power dynamics of abuse. If you put two people across the table from each other and tell them to hammer out an agreement, if there is already a power disparity between them, the perpetrator is going to come out on top of that agreement every time. The victim is going to be harmed by that agreement every time. And so right. And this is something we've known in legal circles and feminist circles for an incredibly long time. And organizations want to do mediation. It's fast, it's easy, it maintains the status quo, it gets you to something as if you could go back from the organizational standpoint to before you knew about the violence. That's what mediation can give you because it reinscribes exactly what was there before. And under the Obama administration, mediation was not permitted. On college campuses is the area I know the best, but what college campuses are really the canary in the coal mine. What becomes normal for the most privileged students on a college campus goes out into the rest of the world. And we saw that. I have a pet theory that's part of why Me Too went viral when it did, was after a lot of campus organizing and a lot of act of the Obama administration on college campuses. So now we have this idea of restorative justice that is spreading out, that is so far divorced from the term that now if I talk about restorative justice online, a lot of people will say, I don't trust it. It's not a good thing. You can't do restorative justice, because the version of restorative justice that they got from their workplace or their school was co-opted. It wasn't restorative justice. And they're right. It did hurt survivors. It was a bad thing. And so that's one of the big difficulties that we have in this current moment is a lot of the words and language that we used to use that was so liberatory. We have to basically reinvent the wheel on that, because reclaiming those concepts when they're everywhere, when we're so outnumbered, especially by people in positions of power, is tough. I think that's one of the issues. And then one of the other issues is just the amount of misinformation. I think the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial is one of the best examples of misinformation proliferating. There's been some incredible reporting since the trial has been over about how disinformation bots were used by very likely Johnny Depp's team, but that can't be completely sure. But the reason why it felt like it was unavoidable, the reason why you felt like you got on YouTube and you couldn't get away from the content, even if you don't want to see it, was because it was promoted and because there were bots that were making sure that they would be popular pieces of content. So we're really, a lot of the spaces we used to go to organize online, Twitter comes to mind as one that is very different than it used to be, that used to have a lot of liberatory potential, and now is a space where you're getting a lot of misinformation, a lot of harassment, to the point that I think any of us needs to be really cautious in these moments of who are we trusting, where is it coming from, do you know who they are and what their perspective is? Because I think a lot of us believe that we know enough that we could never get duped by any of this, but a lot of people were duped during Depp v. Heard. A lot of people are duped by a lot of these other conversations too. And so I think that's one of the trickiest things in these online spaces is about we're up against some really formidable opponents.
Nicole, you've kind of like blown our mind. And the information that you've provided has, at least for me, I can say my mind is kind of on warp speed trying to think or rethink about things that I've thought about. I think you're totally right about everything, especially kind of how the right is co-opting the movements of the left, and how Tashire and I've talked about this for a long time, about how they've always had a plan and we're kind of catching up. So thank you. We have to log off at the hour mark, but thank you for your time and your expertise. We will link your bio and your book in the show notes, and please stay in touch with us.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I'll come back anytime.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for joining us. We see our longtime supporters in the building, and we appreciate you all for joining us. We're here bi-weekly on live, but you also obviously have full-length episodes to enjoy as well. Continue to enjoy the end of the year and have a happy holiday season. We will see you good people next time.